Hello guys, I am Saurav and welcome to my channel. A war is being fought in Ukraine for more than 15 days now. Thousands of soldiers and innocent civilians have lost lives. Why is this war being fought? When and how is it going to end? Its repercussions on the world. How are the dynamics going to evolve in the days to come? India's stand on this war and a little bit of perspective about it. In this video, we'll try to discuss all this. As it's a fast evolving situation, some of the information may get outdated once the video gets published. But I hope to give context to these events to understand the situation better. The history and geography of the region is complicated. We'll try to keep this brief, but to reach the context of this particular war, we need to understand a little bit about the territorial evolution and demography of Ukraine. You might have heard the term Kievan Rus in recent times. Kievan Rus was a federation of Slavic people under the Rurik dynasty in Eastern and Northern Europe that ruled till the mid-13th century. In the later part of the monarchy, Kiev was the capital of Kievan Rus. The Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian people, they all claim cultural ancestry to Kievan Rus. Here is a rough presentation of Kievan Rus's boundaries superimposed on current day maps. It is believed that the Ukrainian identity is more or less based on Kievan Rus. After the fall of Kievan Rus in the 13th century, this region was ruled by multiple rulers over the next 6 centuries and divided and added during the reign of different rulers. This graphic represents the territorial evolution of Ukraine from 1654 to 1922. Geographically, most of the territories were added during the Tsardom and the Russian Empire to what we know as the modern Ukraine. It is important to remember that a significant portion was added in the east by Lenin in 1922 and on the west by Stalin, and the Crimean Peninsula was gifted to Ukraine by Khrushchev in 1954 for whatever cultural and political reasons. Finally, Ukraine joined the USSR in 1922. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine gained independence in 1991, and it was the second most populous, industrialized, and powerful republic after Russia. However, during the Cold War, the USSR built a massive nuclear arsenal, and a significant portion of it was in Ukraine, which remained in the country after its independence in 1991. Ukraine had an estimated 1900 strategic warheads, 176 intercontinental ballistic missiles, and 44 strategic bombers, effectively making it world's third largest nuclear power at the time. But later in 1994, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum with Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom in exchange for assurances to respect its sovereignty, independence, and existing borders. And the nuclear weapons were returned to Russia in 1995. The Budapest Memorandum was clearly violated by Russia in 2014 and again now. Post-independence, over the next 2 decades, Ukraine slowly took a western shift which was not received well in Moscow. Fast forward to 2013. The democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, who was pro-Russia, announced the rejection of a long negotiated association agreement with the EU. He rather chose a Russia-centric approach, the Eurasian Economic Union. It led to massive protests in Kiev. There was massive civil unrest beginning on 21st November 2013, also known as the Euromaidan protests. It ultimately led to ousting of Yanukovych's government, and he fled the country in February 2014. Yanukovych's removal was not received well in the eastern part of Ukraine, where there is a Russian-speaking population is in majority. Russia was furious at the events and started gathering its troops in Crimea, where Russia already had its military bases and naval fleet as part of a treaty with Ukraine. Crimea, as you can see, is strategically located between the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. As I have mentioned earlier, that the Crimean Peninsula was transferred to Ukraine in 1954 by the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, and the Russian people were not very happy with the transfer then. But after the February 2014 events in Ukraine, Russian troops took control of the entire area. Here the majority of Ukrainians pledged their support to Russia, claiming historical and cultural ties. A referendum was conducted under the Russian army occupation, and people overwhelmingly voted to leave Ukraine and join Russia. The UN General Assembly and many Western countries did not recognize this vote, but Putin defended his actions. It did not end there. In March 2014, protests broke out in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region for independence from Ukraine. Russia backed the armed separatists and later sent in its troops into these regions to fight the Ukrainian forces. The separatists declared themselves Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, claiming independence from Ukraine. There have been multiple agreements and ceasefire announcements between Ukraine and Russia, but peace never prevailed in this region. Before we move forward to the ongoing conflict, it is important to understand that there is a clear east-west divide in Ukraine. People in the western part clearly have a western tilt. They want more cultural, political, and economic relations with Europe, and also want Ukraine to join the EU. The eastern part, where there is a Russian-speaking majority, lean more towards Russia and don't want an integration with Europe. The reasons are clearly historical, but it's political too, and geography plays an important role here. If Ukraine chooses to ally with Europe, it brings Europe and by extension NATO right at the doorstep of Russia, which Russia strongly opposes. Similarly, if Ukraine leans more towards Russia, then it brings Russia closer to Europe, which creates threats that the West doesn't want. So there are clearly serious geopolitical ramifications with respect to Ukraine's foreign policies. The crux of the matter is, Ukraine wants to join the EU and even the NATO, which Russia doesn't want. Russia has been opposing NATO's expansion plans in Eastern Europe for years now. Russia feels threatened with the possibility of NATO at its doorstep. Since late January this year, a massive new Russian troop buildup was noticed on the Ukraine borders. Satellite images indicated that troops had started to arrive with military hardware on the borders. Amidst this troop buildup, Russia and Belarus kicked off the Allied Reserve 2022 joint military exercise in Belarus on 10th February 2022. The exercise was supposed to end in 10 days, but it never did. Military equipment ranging from tanks, BMPs, air defense missile units, to helicopters and fighter aircraft started to arrive on the Ukraine borders on the east and on the Ukraine-Belarus border from different parts of Russia. US raised concerns over this massive troop buildup of over 1 lakh soldiers and military equipment, but Putin denied any invasion plans. Then on 21st February, Putin addressed the nation, in which he recognized the self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Luhansk.
В результате большевистской политики и возникла советская Украина, которую и в наши дни можно с полным основанием назвать Украина имени Владимира Ильича Ленина. Он ее автор и архитектор, включая жесткие ленинские директивы по Донбассу, которые буквально втиснули в состав Украины. А сейчас благодарные потомки посносили на Украине памятники Ленину. Это у них декоммунизация называется. Вы хотите декоммунизации? Ну что же, нас это вполне устраивает. Но не нужно, что называется, останавливаться на полпути. мы готовы показать вам, что значит для Украины настоящая декоммунизация.
From the video, Putin's intent seemed quite clear. Invasion of Ukraine.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Специальной военной операции. Кто бы ни пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не сталкивались.
On 24th February, Russian troops started advancing towards Ukraine. A full-scale invasion started. Tanks, artillery, infantry soldiers started entering the Ukrainian territory. Air assaults were launched by attack helicopters and fighter aircraft. Intense fighting started around the cities of Kiev, Lviv, Mariupol, Kherson, Kharkiv, Sumy, and Odessa. Russia went ahead with its strategy of encirclement. In the initial days, Russia quickly advanced in the eastern side, from Donetsk and Luhansk, and around Kharkiv. In the south, from Crimea, and in the north from Belarus. Ukraine, however, has been posing stiff resistance. Russian advance has slowed down significantly over the past few days. Russia has been facing severe logistical issues. Tanks and vehicles running out of fuel, lack of motivation, etc., which is causing this slowdown. Multiple images and videos of abandoned Russian military equipment have surfaced online. However, they have not stopped. There have been multiple attempts at encircling Kiev from all sides, but it has been strongly repelled by the Ukrainians so far. But Putin seems determined to meet his objective at any cost. Russian advance till date can be seen on this map. On 25th February, a UN Security Council resolution was brought by the US to condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine. India, China, and UAE abstained on the resolution. India again abstained on a procedural vote on 28th February, and again on a UNHRC vote seeking probe into the violations amidst an ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, saying dialogue is the only way to resolve this conflict. But why did India abstain? The reason is complicated. Let's try to understand this entire matter from India's perspective. India has good relations with both Russia and Ukraine, but relations with Russia is strategic. Historically, India has always found support and protection, be it from the former Soviet Union or later Russia, on international forums. India's votes on the UNSC is primarily driven by the fact that India is heavily dependent on Russia for its military equipment. From the T-90 and T-72 tanks and BMPs to Kalashnikov rifles and BrahMos missile systems in the Indian Army. From the Sukhoi and MiG fighter aircraft to Mi-17 helicopters, IL-76 transporters, and S-400 air defense systems in the Air Force. From the Rajput class destroyers and Talwar class frigates to Kilo class submarines and the sole operational aircraft carrier INS Vikramaditya in the Indian Navy are all of Russian origin. It is also important to remember that Russia has always shared strategic military hardware and technologies with India that no other country offers, like nuclear submarines, S-400 air defense systems, etc. However, the cause of concern is though it's gradually declining, estimates suggest that close to 60 to 80% of our military hardware has a Russian component, which is certainly huge for a big military like India. On the other hand, India also has good trade relations with Ukraine. But after the war broke out, a humanitarian crisis ensued. Indian students, mostly from medical background, got stuck in Ukraine. With a war ongoing and no transportation facility being available, students pleaded with the Indian government for their evacuation. Indian government launched Operation Ganga to evacuate the students from Ukraine. Ministers were sent to Poland, Hungary, Romania, and other neighboring countries to look after the arrangements. Multiple private airline planes and military aircraft were deployed for the operation. The most difficult was the evacuation from Sumy, where more than 600 students were stranded for days. After multiple failed attempts, a ceasefire was announced on India's request, and all the students were evacuated safely. More than 20,000 Indian nationals and people from Bangladesh, Nepal, and other countries were evacuated by India, which is a huge feat amidst an intense ongoing war. India, however, is in a difficult position with respect to its policy of strategic autonomy. Not condemning Russia publicly has not been received well in the West, especially in the US and UK. Considering India's strategic partnerships with the US and other Western countries and an Indo-Pacific centric Quad, India is in a delicate position. For how long can this balanced approach be followed is yet to be seen, but pressure on India is certainly mounting. It's a moral dilemma for India, no doubt, but the underlying hypocrisy of the Western countries with regards to this war can't be missed here. Though the US wanted Ukraine to officially join the NATO, and in June 2021 Brussels summit, the NATO leaders reiterated their support for Ukraine's membership, its membership was never approved. Ukraine was being lured into joining the NATO, but when Russia really attacked Ukraine, NATO was nowhere to be found supporting Ukraine militarily, at least in the initial days. The EU that wants everyone to take a stand against Russia didn't stop Russian oil and gas supplies. 26% of its oil and 40% of its gas needs are still being fulfilled by Russia. As punishment, sanctions were imposed on Russia. Western countries have frozen the assets of Russia's central bank. Some Russian banks have been removed from the financial messaging system SWIFT. Russian businessmen and billionaires are being sanctioned. Credit card companies Visa and MasterCard have announced suspension of operation. More than 100 global companies like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Honda have partially or fully stopped operations in Russia. Russian state-owned media like Russia Today and Sputnik have been banned. The US and EU have banned Russian airlines from operating in their countries. In response, Russia has announced ban of exports of more than 200 products until the end of 2022. Russia has banned flights from 36 countries to operate in its skies. It has also warned that it could shut off gas supplies in response to oil sanctions. The sanctions are going to destroy the Russian economy in the foreseeable future. But can it stop Putin at this point? And one country that's going to benefit from this situation is China. China has pitched in its Union Pay system as an alternative to Visa and MasterCard payments. China will certainly buy cheap oil, gas, and food grains from Russia till there are sanctions. The delinking of Russian economy from the West may not be good news for all, because it may give birth to a new bloc led by China that can challenge the Western hegemony. As a result of this war, crude oil prices have skyrocketed. Stock markets all over the world have fallen, causing panic among investors. There is a possibility of acute shortage of food grains like wheat and sunflower oil in the days to come. So war does affect everyone around the world. In the past few days, Ukraine has been receiving arms, ammunition, and military equipment from the Western countries. But for how long can the Ukrainians defend their land is yet to be seen. The positive thing coming out in the last few days is diplomatic channels have opened between Ukraine's President Zelensky and Russian President Putin. But the inhuman tragedy unfolding in Ukraine is just heartbreaking. People losing their homes and closed ones right in front of them is beyond tragic. Close to 1,200 civilians have lost their lives in the war, and more than 7,000 soldiers from both sides are estimated to have died. A refugee crisis is unfolding in Europe. More than 2 million people have fled Ukraine for safety. Those left in Ukraine are struggling for basic necessities. War is inhuman and barbaric. At this point, we can only hope for a peaceful resolution of this crisis. Hope this war ends. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. Hope to see you soon. Thank you.